The room was the color of surrender, a sterile, unforgiving gray that coated the walls, the long mahogany table, and the faces of the men who sat around it. Elias Vance felt the color seeping into his own skin, chilling him from the inside out. He was the 28th engineer they had called in that day, another line item on a spreadsheet, another salary to be trimmed in the name of shareholder value. He clutched the worn strap of his messenger bag, the knuckles of his right hand showing white. Inside that bag were schematics, data logs, and the heart of a project that had consumed the last 3 years of his life. A project they were about to discard, along with him. Mr. Marcus Thorne, the CEO of OmniCorp, sat at the head of the table. He did not look at Elias. He stared at a tablet, his finger swiping with rhythmic indifference. Thorne was a man sculpted from polished granite and tailored suits, his voice a low hum of perpetual disappointment. "Vance," he said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Your performance metrics have been stagnant. Your team's output on ancillary projects is the lowest in the division." Elias wanted to scream. He wanted to pull out the files for Project Chimera and slap them on the table to show them the simulations, the energy efficiency ratings that were not just groundbreaking, but world-changing. He wanted to tell them that his team's ancillary output was low because they were on the verge of perfecting a technology that would make every other project in the company obsolete. But he knew it would be useless. Thorne saw innovation not as a goal, but as a controllable asset. Elias's refusal to sign over the unconditional patent rights last month, insisting on a clause that protected his team's contributions, had been seen not as integrity, but as insubordination. This was the consequence. "With regret," Thorne continued, his voice devoid of any such emotion, "we are terminating your employment, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings." The words were like stones dropped into a deep well. Elias felt the impact in the pit of his stomach. He thought of his daughter, Lily. He thought of the rent, the groceries, the promise he had made her that they would visit the Science Museum this weekend. He looked at the faces around the table, bored, impatient, already moving on to the next name on their list. To them, he was nothing, a faulty component being removed from the machine. He did not say a word. There was nothing to say that they would understand. He turned and walked out of the gray room, the silent judgment of a dozen executives at his back. As the heavy door clicked shut behind him, a single devastating question echoed in the sudden silence of the hallway. What had he just lost? Was it just a job, or had he allowed them to take a part of his soul, too? The walk to his cubicle was a blur of forced smiles and averted gazes from colleagues who already knew. The scent of stale coffee and ozone from the servers hung in the air, a smell he had once associated with creation and progress. Now it smelled like a tomb. 2 security guards, their faces impassive, stood by his desk. They watched him as he packed his life into a single cardboard box. A framed photo of Lily with a gap-toothed grin, a half-dead succulent, a row of engineering textbooks with cracked spines. He left the files for Project Chimera in his locked desk drawer. It was company property, after all. Let it rot there. Back in his small apartment, the silence was heavier than it had been in the corporate hallway. The space was cluttered but clean, filled with the evidence of a life lived for a 7-year-old girl. Lily's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A half-finished castle of building blocks stood in the living room, and a faint scent of strawberry shampoo lingered in the air. She was at school, blissfully unaware that their carefully constructed world had just been fractured. Elias sank onto the lumpy sofa, the cardboard box slumping at his feet. He was a brilliant man. He knew it with a certainty that was separate from ego. He could see the elegant dance of physics in a falling leaf, the complex systems in a city's power grid. He could build worlds in his mind, solve problems others deemed impossible. But he could not, it seemed, navigate the simple, brutal politics of a boardroom. He had failed, not just as an engineer, but as a provider, as a father. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making each breath a conscious effort. He had poured everything into his work at OmniCorp, believing he could make a difference from within the belly of the beast. He had believed in the purity of the work, the elegant truth of a well-designed system. He had been a fool. The system was not elegant. It was a grinder, and he had just been fed through it. He closed his eyes, and all he could see was Thorne's dismissive expression, the cold, calculated cruelty of it. They had not just fired him, they had erased him. They had taken his life's work and locked it in a drawer, deeming it and its creator worthless. The injustice of it burned, a hot, useless anger that had nowhere to go. It was the anger of the powerless, and it tasted like defeat. He sat there for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall, each tick marking a second of his new, terrifyingly empty future. The next few days bled into one another in a haze of anxiety and cheap coffee. Elias spent hours online, scrolling through job postings that felt like insults. Junior engineer? System analyst? IT support? Each one was a step down, a confirmation of his diminished value in a world that had cast him out. He tweaked his resume, deleting the proud bullet points about Project Chimera, because he could not talk about it. It was proprietary. It was a ghost. He kept up a brave face for Lily. He picked her up from school with a smile, helped her with her homework, and read her bedtime stories about brave knights and clever princesses. But when she was asleep, the smile would crumble, and the weight would return. He would sit at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills, his mind a frantic storm of calculations. How long could they last on his meager severance? A month? 2? One afternoon, seeking refuge from the suffocating confines of the apartment, he found himself in a small, worn-out diner a few miles from his home. The vinyl on the booth seats was cracked, and the air smelled of grease and bleach. But it was a place of quiet anonymity. He ordered a black coffee he could not afford and nursed it, watching the rain streak down the large window. A woman sat in the booth across from him, surrounded by a fortress of legal files and binders. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, and she chewed on the end of her pen, her expression a mask of frustration. Her laptop, a battered-looking machine covered in stickers, flickered erratically. She muttered under her breath, tapping a key with more force than necessary. Then, with a soft pop and a fizzle of static, the screen went black. A string of curses escaped her lips, quiet but potent. She slapped the laptop, a gesture of pure, unadulterated desperation. Elias watched, a flicker of something other than his own misery stirring within him. He recognized the specific pattern of the screen failure. A faulty inverter cable, most likely. An easy fix, if you knew what you were doing. For a moment, he did nothing. It was not his problem. He had enough of his own. He should just finish his coffee and leave her to her technical woes. But then he saw her face. It was not just frustration there. It was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion he was becoming intimately familiar with. She looked like she was fighting a battle on her own, and losing. Against his better judgment, a voice that was not his own but sounded like the engineer he used to be, spoke up. "It's probably the inverter cable for the backlight," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were a sharp, intelligent green, shadowed with fatigue. "I'm sorry?" "Your laptop," Elias clarified, gesturing with his chin. "The way it flickered before it went dark. It's not the whole screen, just the light behind it. The computer is probably still running." He felt a strange jolt, a spark of life in a part of his brain that had been dormant. He was analyzing a problem. He was finding a solution. She stared at him, a mix of suspicion and intrigue on her face. And you know this how? I'm an engineer, he said, the words feeling foreign. He was an engineer. He still was. Or I was. Her expression softened slightly. She ran a hand through her messy brown hair. Well, former engineer, whatever it just died, and it has my entire case file on it. I have a deadline in 2 hours. I'm sunk. Something in her tone, the simple, unvarnished statement of defeat, resonated with him. He knew what it felt like to be sunk, an impulse, illogical and completely out of character for the broken man he had become, took hold of him. Do you have a small screwdriver? A paperclip? She rummaged through her oversized bag and produced a small multi-tool from a keychain. He stood up and walked over to her booth, the scent of her perfume, something like rain and old books, cutting through the diner's greasy air. May I? He asked, gesturing to the dead laptop. She hesitated for a second, then pushed it toward him. Be my guest. Can't get any more broken. Elias went to work. His fingers, long and nimble, moved with a forgotten certainty. He popped the bezel off the screen casing, located the tiny cable connecting the inverter to the motherboard, and saw the problem immediately. A loose connection, likely jostled one too many times in her bag. Using the tip of the multi-tool, he carefully reseated it. It was a delicate operation, one that required a steady hand and an innate understanding of how things fit together. You should get this properly fixed, he said, his focus entirely on the machine. This is just a temporary solution. He snapped the bezel back into place and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, bright and clear, displaying a half-written legal brief. The woman's jaw dropped. She stared at the screen, then at Elias, then back at the screen. A slow, incredulous smile spread across her face, transforming her tired features. It was like watching the sun rise. How did you do that? I told you, Elias said, a faint echo of his old confidence returning. Loose connection. He slid back into his own booth, the brief interaction feeling more significant than it should have. He had fixed something. It was a small thing, a meaningless thing in the grand scheme of his collapsing life, but it was not nothing. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. Seriously, you just saved me. My name is Clara Mitchell. She extended a hand across the aisle. He took it. Her grip was firm. Elias Vance. Well, Elias Vance, she said, her smile lingering. Can I at least buy you another cup of coffee? Or dinner? Or my firstborn child? You have no idea how much trouble you just saved me from. He found himself smiling back, a real smile that reached his eyes. Coffee is fine. Claire insisted on moving to his booth. As the waitress refilled their cups, she explained her predicament. She was a public interest lawyer, and the case file on her newly resurrected laptop was for a class action lawsuit against a chemical company accused of polluting a local river. She was representing a group of families, farmers, and small business owners who could not afford to fight a corporate giant on their own. They have a team of 50 lawyers, she said, gesturing to her mountain of paperwork. And I have me and a laptop with a loose connection. Elias listened, captivated. He had spent years inside a corporate machine, but he had never considered the people on the other side, the ones who were ground up by its gears. Clara spoke with a fiery passion, a belief in justice that he had long ago dismissed as naive. She was David, and she was slinging her pebbles against a Goliath of industry. Their whole defense rests on their environmental impact reports, she explained, her voice laced with frustration. They're filled with technical data, sensor readings, fluid dynamic models. It's all designed to be impenetrable. I know they're lying, I can feel it, but I can't prove it. The numbers just swim in front of my eyes. Elias felt that familiar spark again, stronger this time. Data. Models. Systems. This was a language he understood better than his own. Let me see, he said, the words out of his mouth before he could think about them. Clara raised an eyebrow. You want to look at hundreds of pages of mind-numbing technical reports? You just met me. I'm an unemployed engineer with nothing better to do, he said with a shrug, though it felt like more than that. It felt like a lifeline. And I hate bullies. A long moment passed as she studied his face, her green eyes searching for something. Whatever she saw, it was enough. She turned her laptop around and opened a file, the screen filled with charts, graphs, and dense blocks of text. To her, it was a wall of noise. To Elias, it was a symphony, and he could already hear the discordant notes. He spent the next hour absorbed in the data, Clara watching him in stunned silence. He was not just reading it, he was inhaling it. His fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing tables, running quick calculations in a small notepad he pulled from his bag. He saw what she could not: the subtle inconsistencies, the manipulated variables, the conclusions that were massaged to fit a desired outcome. Here, he said finally, pointing to a graph showing water flow rates. This is wrong. They're using a static model that doesn't account for seasonal rainfall variations. It dramatically underestimates the downstream dispersal of contaminants. He pointed to another section. And these sensor readings, the calibration logs are missing. They could have set them to read whatever they wanted. He was alive again. The fog of his despair was lifting, burned away by the heat of a problem that needed solving. He was not Elias Vance, the failed employee. He was Elias Vance, the engineer. This was who he was. Clara stared at him, her expression one of awe. I've had 3 different paid experts look at this stuff, and none of them found that. They were looking for a smoking gun, Elias said. But the system is more clever than that. The lie isn't in one place. It's in the architecture of the whole report. It's designed to be technically true in every small detail, but holistically false. He knew the strategy well. He had seen it used at OmniCorp a dozen times to justify cutting corners. Can you write that down? She asked, her voice quiet. In a way a judge could understand. I can do better, Elias replied, a plan forming in his mind, audacious and terrifying. I can build a counter model, a correct one. It would show what the dispersal really looks like. Clara's eyes widened. Could you really do that? He nodded. I could. He would need software he no longer had access to, processing power his old laptop could not handle. It would be difficult, almost impossible. But for the first time in weeks, impossible sounded like a challenge, not a verdict. Elias, she said, her voice serious, I can't pay you. Not what you're worth. My budget is basically 0. He looked at her, at the fierce determination in her eyes, at the righteous fight she was waging all alone in a greasy diner. He thought of the gray men in the gray boardroom and the crushing feeling of being worthless. This felt like the opposite of that. This felt like it could be worth everything. Pay me in coffee, he said, and let me help you win. That was how it began. Elias's small apartment was transformed into a makeshift command center. Clara brought over boxes of legal documents, and they took over the kitchen table. During the day, while Lily was at school, they worked. Clara would explain the legal hurdles, and Elias would translate them into technical questions. He spent his nights, after Lily was asleep, hunched over his computer, writing code, building his counter model from scratch. He used open-source software and pushed his aging processor to its limits, the fan whining in protest. It was exhilarating. He felt a sense of purpose he had not realized was missing until it returned. He was not just crunching numbers. He was building a weapon for Clara to wield in a courtroom. Lily was fascinated by the new arrangement. She would come home from school to find Elias and Clara deep in discussion, surrounded by papers. She immediately adored Clara, who always took the time to ask about her day and admire her latest drawing. One evening, Lily sat at the table with them, coloring, while they worked. She looked up at her father, her small face serious. "Daddy," she said, "are you happy again?" The question caught Elias off guard. He looked at the chaos around him, the legal pads, the empty coffee cups, the complex equations scrawled on a whiteboard he had bought. He was exhausted, underpaid, and fighting an impossible battle. But he was not miserable. He was not numb. He felt engaged. "Yeah, sweetie," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. "I think I am." "Is it because of Clara?" Lily asked, with the simple piercing wisdom of a child. Elias looked across the table at Clara. She was smiling, a soft, warm expression that made his heart ache in a way that was entirely new. He realized, with a jolt, that Lily was right. It was not just the work. It was her. It was the shared purpose, the quiet camaraderie, the feeling of being part of a team again. A team of two, fighting for something that mattered. "Yeah," he admitted quietly, "it's because of Clara." Their connection deepened with each passing day. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, their skills complementing each other perfectly. He admired her tenacity, her unwavering moral compass. She was in awe of his brilliant mind, the effortless way he saw patterns and solutions where she only saw complexity. One night, they were working late, the only light in the apartment coming from their laptop screens. The city was quiet outside. Lily was sound asleep in her room. They had hit a major breakthrough in the case. Elias had found an internal memo buried in the discovery documents that directly contradicted the public reports. It was the smoking gun they needed. The mood was celebratory, but quiet. Clara poured them both a glass of cheap wine in coffee mugs. "We couldn't have done this without you, Elias," she said, her voice sincere. "You're incredible." He deflected the praise with a shrug. "I just like puzzles." "No, it's more than that," she insisted, turning in her chair to face him. "You have this integrity. It's in everything you do, the way you work, the way you are with Lily. Why would a company let someone like you go?" The question hung in the air between them. The wound of his firing, which had begun to scar over, felt raw again. He had never told her the full story, the details of Project Chimera, and the betrayal that came with it. He trusted her. He realized in that moment just how much he trusted her. So he told her. He told her everything. He spoke of his team, of the years of work, of the elegant design of the Chimera system, a revolutionary energy-saving protocol that could reduce power consumption in data centers by up to 40%. He described his passion for the project, the beauty of its efficiency. And then he told her about Thorne, about the demand to sign away all rights, about his refusal to cut his team out of the rewards, and about the swift, brutal dismissal that followed. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he finished, his voice low, "standing up for my people. But in the end, I failed them. They were all reassigned or laid off within a month. And I ended up here. I lost everything for a principle that didn't change a thing." Clara listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he was done, she reached across the small space between them and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, grounding. "You didn't fail, Elias," she said softly. "You refused to break. That's not failure. That's strength. The world needs more people like you, not fewer. OmniCorp didn't deserve you." Her words were a balm on a wound he had not realized was still bleeding. He had carried the shame of his firing like a heavy coat, believing he was flawed, that he had made a fatal mistake. But in her eyes, he saw not a failure, but a hero. A quiet, unassuming one, but a hero nonetheless. He looked at her, at the unwavering belief in her gaze, and felt a profound shift inside him. The last of the gray walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. The moment was broken by a news alert pinging on her laptop. She glanced at it, her eyes scanning the headline. Her breath hitched. "Elias," she whispered, her face pale. "You need to see this." She turned the screen toward him. The headline was from a major tech journal, bold and triumphant. OmniCorp unveils Project Helios, the quantum leap in energy efficiency that will redefine the industry. Elias's blood ran cold. He read the article, his heart pounding a frantic, sick rhythm against his ribs. It described a revolutionary new technology, a protocol that would reduce data center power consumption by up to 40%. It was being hailed as the biggest innovation of the decade. The article mentioned a projected market impact of $600 million in the first year alone. And then, he saw the technical specifications, the brief, dumbed-down explanation of how it worked. It was his work. It was Project Chimera. They had stolen it. They had renamed it, polished it, and were presenting it to the world as their own crowning achievement. Thorne was quoted extensively, speaking of his vision and the tireless dedication of his research and development teams. There was no mention of Elias Vance, no mention of the team that had actually built it. A wave of nausea washed over him. The air was sucked from his lungs. It was a betrayal so profound, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. They had not just fired him. They had not just erased him. They had stolen his legacy, the best work of his life, and were using it to build their empire even higher. The $600 million felt like a personal insult, a monument built on the foundations of his professional corpse. "They won," he said, the words hollow, devoid of all emotion. He felt nothing but a vast, empty coldness. They took it all. He slumped back in his chair, the victory from moments before turning to ash in his mouth. All his work, his principles, his sacrifice, it had all been for nothing. The bullies had won. Clara stared at the screen, then back at him. Her initial shock was rapidly being replaced by something else, something he had seen in her before. The cold, focused anger of a lawyer who smelled injustice. "No," she said, her voice sharp as steel. "They didn't win. They just gave us a new case." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Clara, fueled by righteous fury and an endless supply of coffee, shifted into a gear Elias did not know she possessed. She transformed from a public interest lawyer into a corporate litigator. She made calls, filed motions, and drafted a complaint with breathtaking speed and precision. "They're arrogant," she explained, pacing his small living room like a caged tiger. "They think you're a nobody, a fired, disgruntled engineer who will just roll over. They never imagined you would have a lawyer. They never imagined you would fight back. That's their mistake." Elias was not so sure. He was still reeling from the shock of the announcement. The scale of OmniCorp's power felt insurmountable. They had armies of lawyers, endless resources, and a public relations machine that was already painting Marcus Thorne as a visionary genius. What did they have? A pro bono lawyer, working from a kitchen table, and an engineer with a battered laptop. But Clara's belief was infectious. She saw a path forward, a legal strategy where he only saw a brick wall. "We file for a preliminary injunction to halt the product launch," she said, her eyes gleaming, "and we sue them for patent theft, misappropriation of intellectual property, and wrongful termination. We're going to hit them with everything we've got." The fight was on, but OmniCorp did not become a global behemoth by playing fair. Their response was swift and brutal. Their legal team, led by a notoriously ruthless lawyer named Richard Sterling, filed a motion to dismiss, painting Elias's claim as frivolous and opportunistic. But that was just the opening salvo. The real attack was personal. A week after they filed their suit, an article appeared in a business journal, a profile of the OmniCorp scandal. It was a character assassination piece. Unnamed sources from within the company described Elias as a difficult, uncooperative employee, a man whose performance had been declining for years. They claimed he was fired for incompetence and that his lawsuit was a desperate cash grab from a man who could not handle his own failures. They twisted his integrity into arrogance, his focus into insubordination. Elias read the article, his hands shaking with rage. They were not just stealing his work, they were trying to steal his name, his reputation. They were rewriting history, painting him as the villain in his own story. "It's a classic smear campaign," Clara said, her voice tight with anger. "Don't let them get to you. It's what they do." But it was hard not to. The article was just the beginning. They started digging into his life, looking for any leverage they could find. A private investigator began talking to his neighbors, asking questions about his lifestyle, his habits, his relationship with his daughter. The intimidation was clear. "We know where you live. We can touch every part of your life." The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Elias was helping Lily with a school project, a diorama of the solar system, when the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a stern-looking woman in a drab pantsuit, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Elias Vance?" she asked, her tone clipped and official. "Yes." "My name is Susan Croft. I'm with the County Department of Family Services," she said, flashing a badge. "We've received an anonymous report expressing concern for the welfare of your daughter, Lily Vance. May I come in?" The words hit Elias like a physical punch. Family Services, an anonymous report. He felt the blood drain from his face. This was Thorne. This was OmniCorp. They were not just attacking his career anymore. They were attacking his family. They were threatening to take his daughter. The visit was a nightmare. The woman, Ms. Croft, was professional but cold. She walked through their small apartment, her eyes cataloging every detail. The cluttered kitchen table, the pile of laundry in the corner. She asked him questions about his employment status, his financial situation, his ability to provide a stable environment for Lily. Then she asked to speak to Lily alone. Elias had to wait in the kitchen, his heart hammering against his ribs, while a stranger questioned his 7-year-old daughter behind a closed door. He felt a terror so profound it almost buckled his knees. This was the line. He would fight for his work, for his name, for his principles. But he would not, could not risk losing Lily. She was everything, the only thing that truly mattered. When Ms. Croft finally left, promising a follow-up investigation, Elias sank onto the sofa, completely undone. Lily came and curled up next to him, sensing his distress. "That lady asked funny questions, Daddy," she said. "She asked if you were sad a lot." He pulled her into a fierce hug, burying his face in her hair. The scent of her strawberry shampoo was the only thing holding him together. He had brought this into their home. His fight, his pride, had put his daughter in the crosshairs of a ruthless corporation. The risk was too great. The cost was too high. Later that night, after Lily was in bed, he sat with Clara in the wreckage of their legal strategy. The joy of their earlier work was gone, replaced by a grim, suffocating fear. "That's it," he said, his voice flat. "Dead. It's over. I'm dropping the lawsuit." Clara looked at him, her face etched with concern. "Elias, no. This is just an intimidation tactic. It's a bluff. They have no grounds." "I don't care if it's a bluff," he snapped, his voice cracking. "They came into my home. They questioned my daughter. They are threatening to take her away from me, Clara. Do you understand? There is no patent, no amount of money that is worth that. Not even close. We can fight this," she pleaded. "We can file for a restraining order. We can expose their tactics in court." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You don't get it. I can't. I won't risk her. It's my job to protect her, and this lawsuit is putting her in danger. It has to stop. I need you to call them tomorrow. Tell them we're withdrawing the complaint. Tell them they win. I don't care anymore. He felt the last of his fighting spirit drain away, leaving him hollow and defeated. He had tried to stand up, and they had punished him for it by threatening the one person he loved more than life itself. He was back in that dark place, that state of utter despair, but it was so much worse this time. Before, he had only lost his job. Now he felt like he was about to lose everything. He had failed, completely and utterly. Clara stared at him, her heart breaking for him. She saw the raw terror in his eyes and knew she could not push him. She could only nod, her own eyes filling with tears of frustration and sorrow. The bullies, it seemed, had won after all. Elias did not sleep that night. He sat on the sofa in the dark, the silence of the apartment pressing in on him. He felt like a ghost in his own life, a spectator to his own surrender. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, sounded like a threat. He had made his decision. He would call Clara in the morning and reaffirm it. He would withdraw the lawsuit, crawl into a hole, and do whatever it took to keep Lily safe, even if it meant letting Thorne and his cronies dance on the grave of his life's work. It was the only choice, a father's choice. He must have drifted off, because he was startled awake by a small hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes to see Lily standing before him in her pajamas, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. She was holding a piece of paper. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. "Are you still sad, Daddy?" He pulled her onto his lap, her small frame a warm, solid presence against his chest. "I'm okay, sweetie. Just thinking." "I made this for you," she said, handing him the paper. It was a crayon drawing. On it were 3 figures holding hands: a tall man with glasses, a little girl with a bright red dress, and a woman with brown hair. They were standing in front of a strange-looking building, a mix between a castle and a factory, with sunshine and birds drawn all around them. Underneath, in her shaky first-grade print, she had written, "U.S. Building a Better World." Elias felt a lump form in his throat. He stared at the simple, powerful image. The 3 of them. Together. Building something. "You always told me that bullies only win if you let them," Lily said, her voice small but clear in the quiet room. "That lady today, she was a bully, wasn't she?" The question was so direct, so pure, it sliced through the layers of fear and rationalization he had wrapped around himself. He had been so focused on protecting her from the monster that he had forgotten the most important lesson he had ever tried to teach her. You do not run from monsters. You stand up to them. What kind of father would he be if he taught her to fight for what's right, only to surrender when the fight got hard? What would he be teaching her about justice, about integrity, about her own worth? He looked down at the drawing, at the hopeful, crayon-scrawled world his daughter believed they could build. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. The fear did not vanish, but it was eclipsed by a fierce, protective love that burned brighter and hotter than any terror OmniCorp could muster. They had threatened his daughter to make him back down, but they had miscalculated. They had not realized that threatening his daughter would be the one thing that would make him truly, irrevocably fight back. Not for a patent, not for money, but for the future depicted in that drawing. For the world Lily believed he could build. He hugged her tight. "You're right, sweetie," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "She was a bully, and we're not going to let her win." The next morning, he called Clara. His voice was steady, filled with a resolve she had not heard before. "We're not dropping the case, Clara," he said, before she could even say hello. "We're going to fight, and we're going to bury them." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a slow, audible exhale of relief. "Elias, what changed?" "Everything," he said simply. "They made it about my daughter. Now it's not about winning a lawsuit. It's about teaching her how to fight." From that moment on, Elias was a different man. The cautious, wounded engineer was gone, replaced by a focused, determined warrior. He was no longer just a technical advisor on the case. He became its heart and soul. He worked with a relentless intensity, not just analyzing OmniCorp's data, but anticipating their every move, deconstructing their legal arguments with the same logical precision he used on an engineering problem. He decided he would not hide behind Clara in the legal proceedings. He would face them himself. At the deposition, he sat across the table from Richard Sterling, OmniCorp's lead counsel, a man known for reducing witnesses to tears. But Elias was unflappable. He answered every question with calm, factual clarity. When Sterling tried to twist his words or attack his character, Elias refused to take the bait. He simply stated the truth, over and over again. The turning point came when they finally got Marcus Thorne to sit for a deposition. Thorne swaggered in, oozing arrogance and disdain. He treated the entire proceeding as an inconvenience, a tiresome formality before his inevitable victory. Clara began the questioning, laying the groundwork, but the real confrontation was between Elias and Thorne. Elias, with Clara's guidance, questioned his former boss. He did not ask about feelings or motivations. He asked about data, about timelines, about specific lines of code. "Mr. Thorne," Elias said, his voice even, "can you explain the core function of the alpha-level predictive algorithm in Project Helios?" Thorne scoffed. "I'm a CEO, Mr. Vance, not a coder. I have teams for that." "I see," Elias said. "Then perhaps you can tell the court the date that algorithm was finalized. Our records show it was March 12th. Does that sound correct to you?" Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "I don't keep track of such minutiae." Elias pressed on, calm and methodical. He asked Thorne a dozen more technical questions, each one more specific than the last. Thorne could answer none of them. He grew visibly flustered, his polished veneer cracking under the pressure of his own ignorance. He was the king, but he knew nothing of the kingdom he claimed to have built. Then came the final blow. "Mr. Thorne," Elias said, sliding a document across the table. "This is the source code for the core of Project Helios, provided by your own team in Discovery. Could you please direct your attention to line 7341? Sterling objected, but the judge allowed it. Thorne squinted at the line of code, a meaningless jumble of characters to him. "It's a comment line," Elias explained, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "A note left by the programmer. It appears to be a string of letters and numbers. Can you tell the court what it means?" Thorne was silent, his face turning a blotchy red. "Allow me to translate," Elias said, his eyes locked on Thorne's. "It's a base 64 encoding. When decoded, the string N0EXQZAYMDQYMDEYTG reads LVC02042012N. It's a digital signature I embedded deep in the code. My daughter's initials, Lily Vance, her birthday, April 2nd, 2012, and the letter N for an inside joke she and I have about the North Star. It's my mark, the mark of the man who actually built this. It proves, irrefutably, that the code you are claiming as OmniCorp's invention was written by me, long before your company claims to have started Project Helios." The room fell into a stunned silence. Thorne's face went white. Sterling's jaw was slack. It was over. The lie, so immense and powerful, had been undone by a father's love, hidden in a single line of code. It was a trapdoor only the true creator could open, and Elias had just opened it for the whole world to see. Thorne, the great visionary, was exposed for what he was, a thief. The case did not just collapse, it imploded, taking Marcus Thorne's career and reputation with it. 2 years later, Elias stood on a hill overlooking a park. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the scene. Children's laughter filled the air, a bright, cheerful sound. He watched as Lily, now 9 years old, chased a soccer ball with a group of friends, her laughter the loudest of all. She was happy. She was safe. Next to him, Clara slipped her hand into his. He squeezed it gently, the gesture as natural as breathing. The chaos and fear of the lawsuit felt like a lifetime ago. They had won, of course. OmniCorp had settled for an astronomical sum, enough to ensure he and Lily would never have to worry about money again. The story had been a media sensation, a true David and Goliath tale. Marcus Thorne was fired in disgrace, and the company was forced into a massive, humiliating restructuring. But Elias had not gone back to the corporate world. The victory had not been about money or revenge. It had been about reclaiming his life and his purpose. He and Clara had used a portion of the settlement to start a foundation, the Vance Mitchell Institute for Ethical Innovation. It was a nonprofit that provided funding and free legal support to independent inventors and small tech startups, protecting them from the predatory practices of corporate giants like OmniCorp. He was an engineer again, but on his own terms. He mentored young innovators, helping them develop their ideas without sacrificing their integrity. He was building things again, not just complex systems of code, but a community, a safety net, a better, fairer world for people like him. Earlier that day, he had driven past the old OmniCorp tower. The gleaming logo was gone, replaced by the name of a new company that had bought the building. He had looked at the towering structure of glass and steel, the place that had once defined and then destroyed him, and he had felt nothing. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet sense of peace. It was just a building. It had no power over him anymore. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, her voice soft. He turned to look at her. The afternoon sun caught in her hair, and her green eyes were filled with a deep, abiding love that still, after all this time, took his breath away. She was his partner in everything, the co-architect of this new life. "I was just thinking," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "about a drawing, of the three of us building a better world." He looked from her to Lily, who had just scored a goal and was doing a triumphant little dance. "I think we're doing it." "We are," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. They stood there for a long time, watching their daughter play, two people who had found each other in a greasy diner and had gone on to dismantle an empire. Elias knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that Project Chimera was not his greatest creation. It was not the elegant code or the revolutionary patent. His greatest creation was this life, this family, this hard-won peace. It was a system built not on algorithms and protocols, but on courage, integrity, and love. And it was perfect.